It's see-through Café, and we are starting or following our online meetings. But now we are trying to test a new format, which we internally call espresso, and it's a 20-30 minutes conversation with culturally diverse artists. But now we decided to went overseas and to meet with people who are living in different countries and who are exploring different cultural contexts. So I am absolutely happy to invite my friend and long-term colleague Georgy Mamedov, who is living in Bishkek, capital of Kyrgyzstan in Central Asia. And I'd like to really thank him for being able to join us today. And also, I'd like to say thanks to Joyce, who is making all the technical support right now, and also to my co-curators, Francesca Lamorgia and Anka Danila, who probably are watching us now, and they will be with you and several Mondays. We will be meeting every Monday at 1 p.m. And the last things that I have to say, but not least, of course, it's for the South Dublin County Council Arts Office, to Rua Red Gallery, to Creative Ireland, and to Mother Tongues Festival. So we are here thanks to their support and thanks to everything provided by them. So, Georgi, I really was when I saw your biography, I really saw that I cannot ignore this because your biography that you can find in Mother Tongues Festival starts with the communist and LGBT activist, curator, and educator based in Bishkek. He teaches history and theory of modern and contemporary art at the American University at the Central Asia in Bishkek, and he realized a lot of projects. He is the chair of the Labris Kyrgyzstan, and published several books and almanacs, and in 2015 you were awarded the French Order of Arts and Letters. But let's start with the first word that you decided to apply to yourself. And I put this, it's no, you cannot see, but I put the t-shirt with Lenin. So you saw that you said that you're a communist. And in especially now living in the like non-post-Soviet context, the word communism is, I'd say it's almost forgotten. If the socialism is much more present, but communism is something forgotten. So what is communism for you, and why this is so important for your identity that you put it as the first word that describes you?
Well, maybe exactly. First of all, hello everyone. Hello, Zhenya. Thanks for this invitation. Well, maybe exactly because this word is forgotten, and we somehow, or maybe even, I don't know, stigmatized. So I pick it just to be very clear that who I am, standing politically, because I think that communism is, first of all, an ideological and political project of all-inclusive emancipation and radical form of equality and social transformation. And this is how I understand communism. I've always understood it. I'm absolutely aware of all the connotations the word has, both in the post-Soviet space, because if you say here communist, that would probably be not something that I would identify myself with. I'm not member of any kind of communist party, which are the leftovers of CPSU, Communist Party of the Soviet Union. And perfectly know that for many years we tried to sort of redefine communism by adding the word queer to it, like calling ourselves queer communists, which I still probably would call myself as well. But I also think that communism probably does not need any prefixes of this sort. To me, that's an ideology that involves queer and queer in all its senses, and all kinds of people and their identities and their bodies as a project of emancipation.
So when you say that you're a communist, do you really think that it creates more ambiguity than really describes you somehow? Because for so many people, it is so many different things that communism can be almost whatever. And this is something that I would be struggling with. Because if someone presents himself as a communist, I don't really know what does it mean. It may be something that I totally support, or it can be something that I am very against from. So, do you kind of seek for this ambiguity, or not?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting question. I don't know. I mean, maybe it's good to be ambiguous in some context. But I think that for me, being a communist has a very strong understanding of being, like, you have a negative element to it. So being not a capitalist, like in any sorts, to have this very distinct political identification, yeah, which probably puts you quite far on the left, yeah, and doesn't leave any space for questioning, like reformist, I don't know, social democrat, leftist liberal, or something like that. I mean, I might be all of this as well at some point, but I want to say that, you know, being a radical leftist, as being a radical anti-capitalist, is something that is important for political imagination today. It's exactly because the word is stigmatized and kind of excluded from the political landscape worldwide. And you know, it's an important question actually, because from a post-colonial perspective as well, if I may bring it. I mean, I've been recently sort of looking into the biography and life of a Kyrgyz revolutionary and communist poet who, you know, worked in the 1930s, 1940s, was very active politically and also literary, considered to be classic of, you know, modern Kyrgyz literature. And if you look at his biographies published like in the last 20, 30 years, he would never be identified as communist or revolutionary. Like, this would be completely exempted from his biography. None of his political poetry would be republished. Like, they would focus on lyrical things and things like that. And that question is like, can you, like, one thing, can you even be a communist at all and not be marginalized, like a marginal, you know, commie somewhere on the fringes of political field? And then, can the word communist be applied to people who are not white, so to say, in very general terms? Like that Jomart Bakambayev I'm talking about. He was Kyrgyz, like, and communist, and volunteered to fight the fascists, the Nazi in the World War II. But the questions to people like him would always be like, was he genius? Was he genius? Sorry, was he sincere, or was he just, you know, because everyone was communist, he had to be a communist, or was he just fooled by those Russians, you know, and you know, and they used him as a kind of you know, useful idiot or something like that. So that's an important political statement for me. Yes, you can be communist. You can be communist even in the context like post-Soviet context, where the communism has a strong connotations of what it was. And I think it's important to claim this identity and demarginalize it as much as it's only possible.
Thank you very much. It's actually very interesting that you brought the post-colonial, because we have very little time and we cannot go into certain details that we would you know, you need to explain certain things when you are in this other context. But what I would like to kind of touch is this debate that is happening recently. It's quite recent debate, even though like you started it a decade ago and some others, but it is becoming a mainstream in Russian context. This was the post-Soviet Central Asia and Southern Caucasus or Eastern Europe colonized by Russia or not? And what can we learn from that experience of colonization, non-colonization, decolonization, for example, Irish context, which also is and used to be a colony of the British Empire, but at the same time, it's not colored colony, so there is this ambiguity around it. So I'd like to kind of maybe superficially due to the lack of time, but somehow touches this, and then we will switch to the art scene and art as activism in the Central Asian context.
Well, yeah, it's a big discussion and debate, and it's kind of keeps popping up. Well, I mean, if I have to give a very short answer to that, I would say, well, we cannot equate Soviet experience to colonization. Yeah, that would be a very short and simple answer to this. Of course, it's much more complicated. We can, of course, identify a lot of colonial practices in the Soviet time, but I don't think that these practices in general make the Soviet experience colonial. What actually is happening with communism, I think that's what is being colonized. Like ability of people to consciously join ideological project is being constantly and systemically, consistently, I would say, rejected in a very kind of Orientalist patterns well described by Said. So first, being communist, even being a socialist, or even being from post-Soviet space, and real socialism experience is always presented as something, even with the usage of the word East and West, there's always something secondary, something that was imposed, implying that people in general were unhappy or imposed, forced into this, which of course doesn't correspond with the living experiences of people. And second, what is constantly being rejected, that people could consciously identify themselves as socialist or communist in those contexts. So actually what the coloniality here, or colonial discourse, is actually not about, and probably should be switched, kind of moved from discussing whether historically Soviet Union was colonial or not, but whether are we still colonizing anti-capitalist or socialist or communist, for that matter, perspective of the world, and are the communist subjectivities are still being colonized in this kind of global capitalist political economy in which we are existing? And my answer would be yes, because that's exactly like, oh, are you communist? Is it a joke? Are you serious? Are you mocking? Are you like, what's going on? How can you be communist, like living there? Like all these questions. Well, when you make a claim for your subjectivity, it's always put under suspicion. And that's a very kind of classical colonial, I would even use Orientalist discourse, when everything that is done by non-white person is always questioned in terms of their agency and subjectivity. Like that's always under suspicion, and that's important. That's important for me also to call myself a communist at the end of the day. So sort of being absolutely aware of that. And well, we were talking about Irish experience. I have no experience, like physical experience, real experience with Ireland, neither with the UK actually. But in one of my classes, we read Engels' working class in England, 19th century text. We read the big cities, especially the chapter on the cities, and you can see how racist actually Engels' description of the Irish migrants in Manchester is. Like and sometimes it even, I always try to draw attention of my students to this. I said, did you notice something there? And normally they do not, because they indeed do not associate Irish with the racialized communities, but actually the way the Engels describes Irish as dirty by nature, which makes their conditions even worse than of those English working families living under capitalism, is explicitly racist and racialized. So I think it's just something that changes. You know, our idea of what it means to be racialized, what it means to be identified as non-white, also changes. And it's always not just a tone, complexity of your complexion, or the color of the skin. Yeah, there might be other reasons to racialize you, and like that. I've never done a substantial research on that, but that short inserts from Engels' text suggest that in the 19th century, Irish people were very much racialized in England. Maybe not in the way that we understand race now, but it was the case.
Yeah, I would agree. I also would like to read the comment on Facebook by Stephen Long, which I think is mostly a critique of my words. But communism is easier to understand when we stop conflating it with the historical identification with cults of personality. So, which is, I would agree with that, of course. And of course, as Georgy's book actually in Russian calls queer communism is an ethic, no? So we could speak about it for several hours for sure, and it would be at least for us a very interesting conversation, but I'm sure just not for us. Unfortunately, we have very little time, and it's an espresso meeting. So, Georgy, I'll give you a stage to talk us a little bit more about your art project and how you understand your art project being an activist project too. And then we will come back for the last comments and questions. If we have them from our audience, please feel free to ask. And then we will say bye. Georgy.
Yeah, thanks. Well, yeah, actually, I wouldn't mind even continuing talking about these things. They're extremely interesting, and it seems like we've been doing kind of, you and I and many of our comrades worldwide been doing a lot of work and trying to understand how we can plug in as artists and intellectuals in this kind, contemporary political situations for years. And it seems like we talked about this and we talked about that, but it's still space to talk and discuss it. Yeah, publicly, it never exhausts itself. But since we announced this kind of the topic of the conversation, when art becomes activism, I just want to just share something that I've been thinking about recently. It's a very rough, ideas. But today is 18th of May. So yesterday was actually the International Day Against Homophobia, transphobia, biphobia, and all those kinds of queer phobias that exist out there. And I wanted to kind of briefly maybe mention a project that I myself find my first kind of a political conscious move from aesthetics or from art into activism. And it was in 2012, so 8 years ago, here in Bishkek. We just started our kind of institution called Shtab at the time, School of Theory and Activism Bishkek. And we collaborated with a local LGBT organization, Labris, Kyrgyzstan, and I'm chairing their board now. But at that time, I just recently moved to Bishkek, was just exploring what was going on and met people there. And we decided, okay, how can we just celebrate this day, which normally is marked by political demonstrations, pride parades, etc. Worldwide. We cannot do anything of that here in Bishkek. And then we came up with this idea, and if I briefly outline, been inspired as artist and as a researcher in early Soviet avant-garde, different cultural practices, which also try to challenge the idea of art as an autonomous sphere and see how they can be connected with politics. And we came up with this idea to run a kind of 10-day workshop where artists and activists and regular people could just gather in one space and think and create together posters or stickers or slogans and prints around the Idaho Big Day, and kind of then use it, well, not in the form of political demonstration, but people can just wear a T-shirt or put stickers all around, and that was like a very we called it the workshop of unalienated protest, so that people can come, and in my experience that was the very first thing when LGBT activists who were marginalized, still quite marginalized, in this political and public sphere in Kyrgyzstan. But 8 years ago, it was even much more the case than now. So it was in many ways, it was a very interesting and challenging collaboration, because there were activists, there were regular people. Some of them even at that time, or maybe now, did not identify or did not come out as lesbians or gay or transgender. They were just maybe exploring themselves. And then there were artists who also never dealt with this kind of activism, or never engaged in this kind of practices. And I think that was a very interesting experience, and with a lot of obstacles. Like we, for example, brought on the table all this kind of Russian avant-garde aesthetics, which was not understood very often, neither by activists nor by regular. How is it connected? How can we talk about human rights and LGBT rights and use, like, I don't know, suprematism, and refer to the Soviet aesthetics? These things looked mutually exclusive. Well, for them, for us, it was very organic and actually natural that we kind of make connection between the revolutionary movement of the 20th century with activism today. And in general, like I mentioned this project, in general, I kind of look back 10 years ago and what we were doing, how this politicization sort of started 10, 12 years ago, even on the wave of the 2008, 2009 economic crisis. And it was a different time. We saw a wave of artists and intellectuals sort of moving into activism. Like, I think that the most important communication means was manifesto. We kept writing manifestos all the time, and maybe someone, manifestos were very popular in literal form, but also in the form of artwork, statements, all kinds of things. And here we are. I mean, some 10 years after, in another crisis, which is much more drastic. We're still, locked in our apartments. We don't know what's going to happen next after the virus, stops being so contagious or so problematic epidemiologically. But then the question of economy is still there. Like, I can probably, spare myself from explaining that we're going through a very interesting historical period of volatility, unpredictability, and it's definitely going to be, bring radical changes. But what it means now to be political, like I started thinking about that. I mean, I learned how to write manifestos. That it seemed working. It seemed, something that could have been done then. I don't feel it's the case now. And I started looking to see, okay, what younger people are doing now. Where is this kind of political art, which probably may not be necessarily spotted like that right away? And I came across an interesting phenomenon. There is a singer. She's Tajik, like her origin is Tajik. She lives in Russia. Her name is Manida, and she's been trending and extremely popular. I don't know if we decided not to share anything on the screen, but maybe we can just share with the audience the link to her video. So how should I do it? Maybe Joyce can help us and share that where the stream is. So she started her career as a 15-year-old girl in Russia. She's good vocal. She joined a production studio. The producers told her, "Oh, well, your name is Manizha. Like, come on. I mean, if you want to sing something that people would listen, and it's not Oriental crap, you cannot go under the name Manizha. So we get you a nickname." So she became Rukala, and that kind of successful career for 5 years, and then she realized that
it's a small end note. Rucola is rocket. It's a salad rocket.
Yeah. And then when she was 20 or something, she just quit this kind of showbiz and started her Instagram page under the name Manja, started producing short videos, musical. At some point got very popular with all this young crowd, and made her first album, like self-released her album, made of these Instagram videos, and now keeps self-releasing on YouTube. And that's last video that I want to share. It's called Intersolo, if I translate it more or less into English. And it's a kind of manifesto. She talks about her experience being Tajik in Russia. And she's not a labor migrant. She's been living all her life in Russia in a kind of upper middle class family. And still she constantly in her interviews gives an account of xenophobia, racism, degradation that she experiences as non-Slav, as non-Russian, but at the same time, someone whose native language is Russian, who's raised, educated, lived all her life in Russia, while keeping connection with her Tajik family and visiting Tajikistan. But she is neither Tajik, as she sings, she is neither Russian. She is somewhere in between. And then she makes this video that talks to the experiences of so many, millions of people, both in Russia who are migrants from Central Asia, but also, all over the world, those who cannot claim this, clarity or clearness of their identity, being like proudly and profoundly Russian, or I don't know, whatever you call it. Like that's kind of a hymn of being dirty, mixed. Queer, I would say. She never uses this word, but and it's interesting, like how these things are so like that's another form of activism, which without this, declarations, manifestos, references to political history. I don't know whether it's good or bad, but it works. She talks to the experience of people. She politicizes. She then, goes and makes talks about her experience as a kind of orientalized female singer, feminist. Like, so for example, she has been invited to give talks in North Caucasus in Russia. So like she becomes a figure to which these people can relate. Like, yeah. So it's an interesting process how these things like Instagram, popular music culture, absolutely, without any, highbrow, element to it, but very smart, very delicate, becomes a new form of activism. And I see that we are running out of time. My last point was to draw attention to TikTok. That's like even further step from that. That's the network, the platform that I've been exploring now. And I want to make a connection to the first project that I talked about, this workshop of unalienated process, which we somehow thought as a sort of prolet cult, when artists and workers and activists, they come together in some kind of immature artistic expression. And TikTok seems to be like a global, workers club now. It's a global prolet cult where everyone can express themselves. I know how the algorithms works and how they can censor political speech and what they call ugly representation. All these things are there, but it's also something that I feel has a potential for creative activism based on, and that works on a ways that probably are not connected with what we took from the 20th century experience. And I feel challenged about that, and I want to explore whether these forms can be turned into something progressive, if not revolutionary. I mean, it's a question mark. I don't want to sound over enthusiastic, but my point was that since our generation have been living through crises all our lives, like I think now we cannot always rely on one kind of recipe design at some point. of how to turn your artistic work into activism. And probably today we also have to think about other ways of doing so. Maybe something that what I did 10 years ago probably would not work today. Well, not probably, highly likely it will not work. So we need to look for something else.
Thank you very much. I was really listening with a huge interest, and I was also watching at the clock, and I kind of I have to interrupt our conversation, and it's a big disappointment for me. But I have a lot of questions here written for you, and I really would like to maybe keep talking, and maybe hopefully one day you will be able to travel to Dublin, and then we will meet offline in Rua Red Gallery, and we'll have a proper long conversation, which is of course easily to listen and observe and understand when it's not through these new technologies and through this internet platforms and stuff. So I really hope that even though these new technologies give us the opportunity to meet each other and see each other and conversate, we will still remember how precious is the offline meetings and hugs and all the human interaction, physical human interaction, which is also a sort of communality, that we are now missing so much. So I don't think we have more conversation questions now on the platforms, but if we do, please feel free to ask, and Georgy will see them on this video that you can access at any time. If you cannot do it now, you can do it later. And thanks again to everyone who was watching us or will be watching us and who is supporting us. And I wish to everyone stay safe, stay well, and thanks again, Georgy. We will meet again, I have no doubts about it.
Yeah, well, I'm looking forward actually to meeting.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And bye-bye, everyone.